Welcome to an Echo of the Past channel. I'm Elisabeth of Bavaria, but the whole world knows me as Sissi. I was born a free-spirited Bavarian princess and became Empress of Austria and Queen of Hungary. My life has been full of glitter and shadows, love and pain, and today I tell it to you in my own words. If you are fascinated by the fates of historical figures and want to hear stories directly from those who lived them, be sure to subscribe to our channel. You will always be the first to hear new stories from the past. Thank you, and I look forward to walking with you through my entire life, from childhood to its tragic end. I was born on the most wonderful day of the year, Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1837, in Possenhofen Castle on Lake Starnberg in Bavaria. I was a gift under the Christmas tree, as my dad always told me with a smile. My name is Elisabeth Amalie Eugenie, but ever since I was a little girl, everyone just called me Sissi. My father, Duke Maximilian of Bavaria, was a free-spirited man with a heart full of love for music, poetry, and nature. He wasn't a typical nobleman. He didn't care about court intrigue or politics. He preferred to play the zither, write poems, and spend time with us, his children. I was his pet. His little wild rose, as he called me. Mama Ludovica was strict but loving. She came from Bavarian royalty and always knew what duties awaited us. But despite her nobility, she allowed us the freedom we so enjoyed. I grew up surrounded by my siblings. I had an older sister, Helen, whom we all called Nene, a brother, Ludwig, and younger siblings. Our childhood was full of laughter, games, and endless adventures. Possenhofen Castle was not a cold fortress full of strict rules. It was our home, our refuge, a place where we could just be children. Daddy taught us to ride horses. Horses! That was my greatest love ever since. I remember the first time he let me sit in the saddle on my own. I felt the sense of freedom, the wind in my hair, and my heart beating with joy. "Sissi," Daddy told me then, "the horse will carry you wherever you want to go. But you must trust him, and he will trust you." I took those words to heart, and have never forgotten them. My mother tried to raise us to be real ladies. She taught us French, Italian, dancing, and court etiquette. But Daddy taught us something else. He taught us to love life, nature, art. He read us poetry, told us stories of old fables and legends. In the evenings, as the sun set over the lake, we would all gather in the parlour and Papa would play the zither. I sat at his feet and listened to the melancholy melodies that filled my soul with longing for something I could not yet name. I was a sensitive child, full of dreams and fantasies. Often I would run off alone into the woods, sit under an old lime tree and write poems to myself. No one knew about it. It was my secret. The words came to me like whispers on the wind, and I wrote them in my diary. I wrote about birds, about clouds, about how I wanted to fly and be free like them. Nene was my best friend. She was 2 years older than me, calmer, more obedient. My mother always made an example of her. "Look at Helen, acting like a real princess," she used to tell me. But Nene never judged me. When I'd come back from a muddy adventure in the woods, she'd just smile at me and help me clean up before dinner so Mum wouldn't know. We were like two halves of the same heart. But even in that beautiful childhood, I sometimes felt a strange melancholy. Looking up at the stars, I asked myself what my life would hold. I had a feeling that something big was waiting for me out there, something that would change my life. Sometimes that excitement filled me, sometimes it scared me. I remember one summer evening when I was about 12 years old. I was sitting by the lake, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The water was still as glass and the sky was turning pink and purple. Daddy came and sat next to me. "What are you thinking about, my little Sissi?" he asked me gently. "Papa," I said, "will I always be here with you? Will I always be so happy?" He hugged me and was silent for a while. Then he said, "Life is like this lake, Sissi. Sometimes it's calm and beautiful. Sometimes it's stormy. But remember, no matter what happens, you will always be my daughter, and this place will always be your home." I didn't know then, How prophetic those words were. I didn't know that one day I would long to return to this paradise with such pain that my heart would be heavy. I didn't know that my life would soon change forever. But in that moment, I was just happy. I was free, loved, and the whole world was waiting before me like an unopened book full of stories. That was my childhood, beautiful, wild, full of love and freedom, and that was what almost destroyed me later when I lost that freedom. I was only 16 years old when my world began to change unexpectedly. I was still living in our Bavarian paradise, surrounded by my family and nature, but in the background were the notes of the great destiny that awaited me in Vienna. That destiny was Franz Josef, Emperor of Austria, a man who was spoken of as the epitome of power and responsibility. But for me, above all, he was an unknown, mysterious young man whom I was to meet at the imperial court. I remember the day I was first brought to the Hofburg. I was nervous, full of anticipation and a little bit of fear. Everything was different, big, pompous, full of rules I had never known. My freedom from Possenhofen seemed as distant as another world. During the ceremony, I was struck by how quiet and focused Franz Josef was. His eyes were deep, a little sad, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Yet he gave me a strange feeling of peace and security. Meeting him was not immediately full of love. Our relationship was more like a dance between anticipation and uncertainty. My father and mother had high hopes that the wedding would unite two powerful families and consolidate peace in Europe. But I wanted only one thing, to remain myself. I often felt like a prisoner of my fate as I accepted the role of future empress, not knowing what it meant to be the one who could never be free. My rebel spirit began to rebel for the first time. I remember the evenings when Franz Josef and I walked together in the imperial gardens. He told me of his duties, of the weight of the crown that does not rest lightly on his head. I told him about my childhood at Lake Starnberg, about my dreams of freedom and how much I longed for a life that was not just about rules. It was a strange union of two souls who met, even though each carried their own burdens. When the wedding proposal came, my heart made the decision for me with mixed feelings. I knew that I had to leave my life in the Bavarian paradise, my beloved horses, my family, and above all, my freedom. With that meeting, a new chapter of my life began. A chapter that transformed me from a free girl into an empress, but also robbed me of the carefree and peace of mind I so longed for. When I arrived in Vienna, I felt like a small fish in a huge sea. Everything around me was new, strange, and sometimes even frightening. The Hofburg castle, where I was to live, was huge, cold, and full of secrets that weighed on my heart. My life changed overnight. From a free girl running around the Bavarian meadows, I became an empress whose every step was watched, every movement judged. Everyone expected me to be perfect, elegant, obedient, and above all the embodiment of all the ideals of the monarchy. But I was still the same Sissi who longed for freedom, for the forest, for horses, for the wind in her hair. Instead, I was trapped in strict rules of etiquette, in a corset that suffocated me, and in a society where I often felt lonely even among people. My first meeting with my mother-in-law, Empress Sophie. She was a woman of strong will and hard rules, who taught me early on that there was no room for weakness at court. Her gaze was often stern and unyielding, and I did my best to conform to her expectations. The days were filled with ceremonies, visits, balls, and endless social engagements. I learned that a smile must always be in the right place, and words carefully weighed. But inside I was screaming. I wanted to escape, to return to my Bavarian paradise, where I was happy and free. My husband, Franz Josef, was often busy with affairs of state and the wars that plagued the empire. Our moments were brief and full of mutual expectation, but also misunderstanding. He bore the weight of the crown. I bore the weight of the role I had to play. There were times when I felt like a stranger in my own life, when my heart yearned for something more than gold and crowns. I longed for a space where I could be myself, where I could breathe without pretense or expectation. Still, I tried to find my little escapes, walking in gardens, riding horses, corresponding with family in Bavaria. These moments gave me the strength to survive and dream on. When I became Empress, I thought that my family would be my fixed point, the place where I would find comfort and understanding. But the reality was much more complicated. My mother-in-law, Empress Sophie, was a strong and stubborn woman who had a clear idea of what an empress should look like, and I often felt that my dreams and desires didn't match that idea. Her strictness and constant criticism weighed on me more than I could express. Her husband, Franz Josef, was devoted to his duties, often tired and distant. I loved him, but I felt alone in a sea of court intrigue and expectations. My sister Helena, who also married Franz's brother, was my closest connection in a foreign environment. With her, I could share my joys and pains, but she too was often under the pressure of court etiquette. The greatest pain for me, however, was my children. I had 4 offspring, but motherhood was not always a source of joy for me, as one might expect. I often felt trapped between the roles of mother and empress, between my love for my children and the responsibilities that suffocated me. My health and spirit began to suffer. The desire for freedom, for escape from the palace, grew stronger. I felt like a caged bird desperate for the open sky. In these moments, I sought solace in travel, in literature and in my own dreams. I wrote poems and letters that helped me keep a piece of myself. My childhood in the Bavarian paradise was a distant memory, but one that sustained me. I knew I had to find a way to live my life as I wanted, even if the world around me was pushing me into forms that didn't suit me. When I was trapped in the glitter of the Viennese court, I began to search for an escape that would give me the sense of freedom and peace that my heart so longed for. And I found it in travel. My first trips were no ordinary excursions. They were escapes from the palace walls that stifled my freedom and joy of life. When I could, I rode my beloved horse away from everything that bound me. Later, I began to travel further afield, to Italy, Corfu, Hungary, and other places where I could breathe freer and feel that the world was bigger than the court and its rules. Each trip was like a new chapter in my life. Standing on the seashore, listening to the sound of the waves and feeling the salty wind in my hair, I felt like a truly free woman. These moments gave me strength and reminded me of who I really was, not just an empress, but a person with a longing for life, for love, for freedom. Travelling also helped me to escape the pain and loss that I had experienced in my life. It was a time when I could be myself, without expectations, without pretense. But even when I travelled, I knew I couldn't completely abandon myself to my destiny. My responsibilities were always catching up with me, and I realised that the freedom I longed for was sometimes only a dream. There are moments in life that change you forever, moments that will never be the same. For me, that moment was the morning of January 30th, 1889. I was in Vienna then, in a cold palace I had never loved. Franz Josef was, as always, absorbed in his affairs of state. Our relationship had been distant for years, full of silences and unfinished words, but there was one person who gave me hope: my son, Rudolf. Rudolf was my firstborn, my beloved boy. When he was born, I felt real joy for the first time in a long time. He was beautiful, intelligent, sensitive. He had my eyes and my desire for freedom. But he also inherited my melancholy, my dissatisfaction with the world that bound us. He grew up under the strict supervision of his father and his grandmother, Sophie. They wanted to make him the perfect heir to the throne, a strong emperor to carry the weight of the monarchy. But Rudolf was not like that. He was a poet, a thinker, a man who saw the world differently from his father. His marriage to the Belgian princess Stephanie was unhappy. It was a marriage of duty, not love. I saw in his eyes the same pain I once felt when I came to Vienna as a young girl full of dreams. Rudolf began to withdraw from the court, from his father, from everything. We often talked about freedom, about escape, about living somewhere far away. "Mother," he would say to me, "I feel like a bird in a cage. I can't breathe, I can't live." Then she came along, Mary Wetzer. She was a young, beautiful 17-year-old baroness with whom Rudolf fell in love. She was his consolation, his hope, his last chance for happiness. But their love was forbidden, impossible. The court could not allow it. Franz Josef forbade Rudolf to see her. Their quarrels grew more and more violent. Rudolf felt trapped, desperate, without a way out. And then came the fateful day. It was morning when my lady-in-waiting came running to me, pale-faced. "Your Majesty, there is a message from Mayerling." Mayerling was a hunting lodge where Rudolf often went. I thought he was just hiding from the world like I used to, but the news was different, terrible, unbelievable. Rudolf was dead, and Mary Wetzer with him. My world fell apart. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. It was like someone had ripped my heart out of my chest. They told me it was suicide, that Rudolf shot Mary first and then himself. They told me that he left suicide notes, that it was his decision, his choice. But I was his mother. I knew him. I knew it wasn't weakness. It was desperation. It was the cry of a soul that couldn't find a place in this world. Francis Joseph was devastated, but he remained silent. The court tried to keep the whole thing quiet, to avoid scandal. Mary Wetzer was secretly buried in Heiligenkreuz, as if she had never existed. Rudolf was buried in the imperial tomb, but his name became a taboo. From that day on, I dressed only in black. Black is the colour of sadness. Black is the colour of despair. I never took it off again. Mayerling became my curse. Every day I thought of my son, what he must have felt in those last moments. Why didn't I help him? Why wasn't I strong enough to save him? I blamed Franz Josef. I blamed the court. I blamed the whole system that was suffocating us all. But most of all, I blamed myself. From then on, I was just a shadow. My laughter disappeared, my joy in life was extinguished. I travelled even more than before, trying to escape the pain, but it followed me everywhere. I wrote poems full of sadness and loss. In one of them I wrote, "My son, my hope, my love, all taken from me. I am left alone in an empty world where there is no room for joy." Franz Josef tried to be strong, but he suffered too. Our marriage fell apart even more. We were two people connected by pain but unable to help each other. The Mayerling tragedy didn't just change my life, it changed the whole dynasty. Rudolf was heir to the throne. His death meant that the succession passed to the next branch of the family, to Franz Ferdinand, whose death in Sarajevo 25 years later sparked the First World War. But I didn't know that at the time. I knew only one thing, that I had lost my son, my hope, my reason for living. I've been dead inside ever since. I lived for 9 more years, but it was just an existence, not a life. I was waiting for the end, for the moment when I could be with my Rudolf again. And that moment came in Geneva at Lake Léman, when the anarchist's dagger ended my suffering. Mayerling was the beginning of the end, and I never stopped grieving. My life had been like a turbulent river, full of ups and downs, joy and pain. I had lived more than anyone could have imagined, and yet I still longed for something more, for freedom, for love, for a life that was true and full of meaning. After the death of my beloved son Rudolf, I felt like a shadow of myself. My heart was broken, and I sought solace in endless journeys. I dressed in black, wearing sadness not only on my clothes, but in my soul. I travelled through Europe, seeking peace and oblivion. The Viennese court was an increasingly foreign place where I didn't feel at home. Franz Josef was absorbed in his duties, and we drifted apart, though our love never completely faded. I was 60 years old when I arrived in beautiful Geneva, Switzerland, that day in September 1898. It was a sunny afternoon, and I was walking along the shores of Lake Léman, with my lady-in-waiting, Countess Irene Stare. I felt slightly tired, but also calm. Geneva was beautiful, and I enjoyed a rare moment of peace. We walked to the dock where the boat was waiting for us. I was headed for another place, another journey that would bring me a moment of freedom. Then a man approached me. He looked inconspicuous like so many people on the waterfront. But there was something strange in his eyes, something dark. Before I could react, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It was only a brief moment, like the prick of a needle. The man disappeared into the crowd and I stopped. The Countess asked me what had happened, but I just shook my head. I thought I had just been pushed or hit. The pain wasn't unbearable. We continued to the boat. I got on board and it was only there that I felt myself getting sick. My legs were weakening and the world around me began to spin. "What's wrong?" I asked myself. The Countess caught me as I began to fall. "Your Majesty, what happened to you?" she cried in horror. I was put on the deck and only then did I realize that something serious was happening. When they unbuttoned my dress, they discovered a small wound on my chest from which blood was oozing. It was just a small wound, but I knew it was the end. The man who stabbed me used a thin dagger. He hit my heart, and I was slowly dying. "How could this happen?" I whispered. I could feel my strength ebbing, my eyes closing. I thought of my life, of my childhood in Bavaria, of Franz Josef, of my children, of all the joys and pains I had experienced. My last thoughts were of Lake Starnberg, of my father, of the horses, of the freedom I had longed for all my life, and then I felt peace, peace at last. I died on September 10th, 1898, in Geneva. The man who murdered me was called Luigi Lucchini, an Italian anarchist who wanted to kill a prominent figure. I was just an accidental victim of his hatred of the aristocracy. My life ended tragically, suddenly, as if fate wanted to show that even the Empress cannot escape death. But I believe my message lives on. I was a woman who loved freedom, who fought for her identity, who never stopped dreaming. I was Sissi, a rebel in a crown, a poet in a golden cage, a woman who wanted to live by her heart. No matter where life takes you, no matter what hardships you face, never lose faith in yourself. Seek your freedom, your joy, your purpose. Be true to your heart, even when the world around you pushes you into forms that do not suit you. Thank you for walking through this story with me. If you're interested in more stories from the past, be sure to subscribe to An Echo of the Past. My name is Elisabeth of Bavaria, and although my life ended tragically, my dreams and my message live on. Goodbye, dear friends, and remember, be free. The past whispers, the future listens.